And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another victorious episode of the Assembly Call as today the Indiana Hoosiers breezed by Grand Canyon by a final score of 94-66 at Assembly Hall in Bloomington, Indiana. It is a game the Hoosiers led by 11 in the first half, and after a pretty decent start, the final 10 minutes of that first half were just kind of blah, kind of meh. But Indiana came out in the second half, and I thought really played with a lot more energy, a lot more focus, especially early. The Hoosiers started out on a 10-4 run to start the second half. And really put some distance. It was 42-31 at halftime. After the under 12-minute timeout in the second half, it was 69-42. So the Hoosiers really went on a big run there to put Grand Canyon away. And again, ended up with the victory 94-66. And we are going to break that victory down for you today on the Assembly Call, as we always do. I am your host, Jerod Morris, and I am very, very excited to be joined by my usual sidekick, well, one of my usual sidekicks anyway, on the Assembly Call, Ryan Phillips, who is back from his septum and sinus surgery. And screw it, for today's banner moment, we're going to honor you, Mr. Phillips, and welcome you back from your surgery. We're happy to have you.
Well, I'm certainly happy to be back. Not doing anything for a week in recovery is kind of the exact opposite of my personality. So I've kind of been going crazy for the last week or so. So yeah, it's great to be back. I'm happy.
And you sound good. You sound good. You look good.
Thanks. It's about a 6-week total recovery, but I feel better already, so that's a positive. And yeah, I was just excited the team won today, so we had something good to talk about.
Exactly. So, and really, for the real banner moment today, I want to single out Troy Williams, who I thought really did a nice job. His final line was 14 points, 8 boards. He did not have a turnover. He was 5 of 9 from the field. Really efficient. Had a couple of assists. And the 2 assists I thought were terrific. You saw one of them there at the end of the second half when he took the ball coast to coast. Another one in the first half, which I liked even better, was Troy. He had the ball on the left wing, and he took a couple dribbles, and it was the kind of play where he would usually kind of drive all the way in and throw up one of his wild running hooks, and instead he kicked it out to Nick Zeisloff for a 3. And, of course, if you've been watching the show, you know that I've been kind of harping on with Troy, don't be a creator, be a finisher. Well, on that play, he was a creator, but instead of driving all the way in and doing something crazy, he was able to set up a teammate. And, I thought what we saw from Troy was really Troy at his best today. Very active, very aggressive, especially on the glass early. I mean, he had 4 rebounds, it seemed like, before the first TV timeout. So, I thought after really struggling in the Louisville game, and I think trying to do too much and playing a half step too fast, I was really impressed to see him come out, still be aggressive, but be kind of that half step slower in a good way, where he's not just out of control, he's not turning the ball over, and so I thought that was really good. Now, I will offer up this caveat, which is that, Troy needs to not get overconfident with all of the dribbling, because a lot of that dribbling was working today because there wasn't much defensive resistance being offered up by Grand Canyon. So he's got to be careful against much tougher defensive teams like Butler and Georgetown. He's got to still be just as smart. And if it's not there to dribble, get rid of the ball, not dribble in too far without an idea of what he's going to do. But in terms of a bounce-back game and maintaining his aggressiveness and still being effective, I thought this was a really nice game for Troy today. And I think we need performances like this from him in our bigger games to be effective and to beat the teams that we need to beat to make the NCAA tournament. So it'll be big for Troy now to translate this performance to the Butler and the Georgetown game. But in terms of a bounce-back performance after that Louisville loss, you couldn't ask for anything more from him. So a hat tip to Troy today for a really nice effort. Ryan, let's go over to you. Get your I don't know what there really is to rant about in kind of an easy win like this, but what are your initial thoughts on this IU victory?
The guy who stood out to me a little bit was Hunter Perea, and mostly in the second half. I thought he really didn't do a whole lot in the first half. They weren't really looking to him. I thought we were just settling for threes for most of the half, and you saw Yogi sort of dribbling around and waiting for something to open up. It wasn't dribbling with a purpose. And I thought in the second half you saw Perea have some nice finishes, sort of show flashes of what he showed at the beginning of at times during the Louisville game, which was, the Louisville game for me, I wasn't here to talk about it, but for him it was sort of like oh yeah, that's the guy we've needed or wanted, and you kind of like to see that. And I thought, he's a guy who really all season had only gotten his points on dunks, point blank dunks with nobody guarding him. And then against Louisville, you saw him taking people off the dribble. You saw him going one on one. You saw him making moves in the lane. I thought he did some more of that tonight. I mean, in a game where I think I agree it was dominated by Troy Williams, I thought that Hunter did some nice things. Now, on the other hand, he's got to stay on the court longer. He's got to. I mean, he did tonight for stretches, but you could tell there are times where it's almost like, all right, well, it's probably about time. You almost get the feeling it's probably about time for him to come out because he really plays well in spurts, but can't sustain it long term. He's got to be able to do that, especially as the season goes on. We start playing teams with deeper, with deeper front courts that are going to throw lots of guys at him. So I thought again he showed some positive things, and with Hunter it's sort of like we're taking every positive we can get, because we need him so badly, and we need Emmett Holt and those guys. I mean, a Big Ten play, I feel 100% confident saying those two need to combine for 15 or 16 points and 12 rebounds a game if we're gonna make the tournament. And so whatever we can get from those guys is big.
Yeah, and today they combined for 17 points and 9 rebounds and 3 blocks. And Emmett did nothing in the first half. He was actually the only Hoosier who played who didn't score a point or grab a rebound in the first half. Came out in the second half and was a lot more aggressive, had 6 points, 2 boards, had a block shot. But yeah, to your point with Hunter, I mean, the way that he played early in that game against Louisville, I mean, it looked like a different guy. He was so confident. He's driving baseline. He's got his little jump hook working. I mean, it was almost like, he and Montrezl Harrell like switched uniforms for the very start of the game because he was the one scoring points. Now, obviously that reversed itself later in the game, and you're right about him, right now playing in spurts, and we need it more consistently because I actually thought he came out at the start of the game and was kind of leaning on his man on defense, not really quite into it, but he got into it more, especially in the second half, and we saw that offensive competence that is starting to become a more regular feature. And I don't know if there's any direct correlation to it, but I feel like we've started talking a lot more about, wow, he looks a lot better on offense ever since, Emmett Holt kind of had his coming out party against Pitt. It seemed like Hunter has been a little more aggressive, a little more focused. Those stretches of good play have been a little bit longer. And we even saw, a few aggressive rebounds from him today. So he continues to be a work in progress. We continue to need more from him and more consistently, but we are seeing progress. And
yeah,
go
about it that I think hasn't really been talked about is he's now practicing against Emmett consistently too, and we know Emmett's a shot blocker and a rebounder, and those guys working on each other in practice is only going to make them better. And he didn't have a whole lot of practice time against him before the season started because Emmett was a late arrival. So, I mean, things like that are a big deal. I mean, getting to practice against good competition makes you better. And you were hearing the guys on the broadcast today talk about how today's shoot-around, instead of a shoot-around, it was a full practice for the team. They were actually going at it and things like that. And frankly, at this point of the season, these guys need that. They need to keep being challenged, especially when they're playing lower-level competition.
Another individual performance I want to single out is James Blackman Jr., who he also did some scoring in spurts today. Finished with 18 points, had 6 boards. He was another one who grabbed 4 boards really early in the game. And I do want to say, in terms of rebounding, coming out of that Louisville game, I tweeted out before the game, that's what I was really watching was the rebounding. And Indiana ends up out rebounding Grand Canyon 52-35. It seemed like they had that 17 rebound advantage after like the first 8 minutes in the first half. But the Hoosiers rebounded 73.8% of Grand Canyon's misses, and it was actually much better than that for most of the game. And they even rebounded 46.7% of their own misses. So Grand Canyon is not a good rebounding team by any means, but I do think we saw some more aggressiveness, some more focus on the glass, and obviously after that Louisville game, that was a point of emphasis from the coaching staff. So it's good to see that translated to the floor. And once again, this team was led by James Blackman Jr. He didn't lead the team in rebounding. He was third with 6. But, he really came out, and you could tell he was focused on rebounding. Had the 18 points, and he had 7 points early. When Indiana went on that 10-4 run to start the second half, James had 7 of those points. And I got to tell you, I was a little worried at halftime. If you watch this whole game, the game kind of started to get that weird feel at the end of the first half where it's like, okay, both these teams just want to get on with their weekends. The crowd was totally out of it. It had that weird feel like if Indiana didn't come out early in the second half and really pick it up, like it could be a dogfight. And to the Hoosiers' credit, they made some adjustments at halftime, came out aggressive. Really, the main adjustment was just, they got a half step more aggressive and put that distance between themselves and Grand Canyon in the second half. And James was a big part of that because he came out looking for a shot, made a three, had a couple of nice drives, and really from there, the Hoosiers cruised. But another solid effort from James Blackman Jr. Ryan, any other individual performances that really stood out to you among the remaining guys?
No, I think James was the other one I would have talked about. I thought that it's really hard for a freshman to be in that situation. That was an incredibly flat crowd. It was an incredible, like you said, the second 10 minutes of that first half was just lethargic for everybody on both teams. I mean, the crowd was just completely out of it. I mean, it was like they were playing in an empty warehouse and with cheerleaders. That was it. I mean, and so I just thought that to come out in the second half, they needed to come out with some energy in the second half, and they did. And James was a big part of that. I thought he was a couple times he looked to attack too much. Almost going one-on-one like he was just trying to get his. And I know that's not what he was doing, but that's just how it came across. And same with Yogi at some times. Like Yogi was just trying to dominate the offense and get some point and whatever. That's not what they're doing, but it's just you fall into that pattern of attacking and not looking around you when there are guys standing wide open for perfect shots. And so I think that he did a good job reining that in a little bit at times, and it's nice to see him attacking the basket too and not just falling in love with the three-point shot.
Yeah, you mentioned Yogi, and it was perfectly clear just how valuable Yogi is to this team against good competition in that Louisville game because Indiana played very well in the first half, but completely fell apart for the 2 minutes when Yogi was out of the game. And he's really played well his last few times out. And I thought today probably his worst overall performance of the year. Just really never seemed to get in the flow of the game. He was 3 of 15 from the field, so took the most shots on the team. Only made 3 of them. He only had 3 assists, couple rebounds. Seemed to get really frustrated at some foul calls. And look, when you play 30 some odd games, you're going to have some nights that just aren't yours. And fortunately for Indiana, the competition is Grand Canyon, and so they didn't need Yogi to be Yogi. And Yogi really wasn't Yogi. But there were other guys who stepped up. Certainly, we know that Yogi is going to come to play in the big moments, so nothing really to be concerned about. Let me throw out some numbers here, Ryan, and whichever one of these you want to comment on, jump in when I'm done. In terms of efficiency, Indiana scored 1.37 points per game, so obviously good and what they should do against Grand Canyon. They held Grand Canyon to 0.97 points per possession. Now, for some context, Indiana on the season has been holding teams on average to 0.99 points per possession, so it was better than that. But Grand Canyon coming into the game was scoring 0.96 points per possession, which is 263rd in the country. So they actually allowed Grand Canyon to score more than what they had been. That was in part because Dwayne Russell played point guard for Grand Canyon. He's a transfer from Northern Arizona who was actually named the Arizona State Player of the Year 2 years ago. So he's a very good player, and he carved up Indiana in the first half. I think he had 14 of his 16 points in the first half. Was taking the ball from outside the three-point lane to the bucket, even against a zone, which is kind of inexplicable. Maybe we can talk about that in a little bit. But those were the efficiency numbers. Another number that really jumps out, Indiana only turns the ball over on 5.8% of its possessions. The Hoosiers only turned the ball over 4 times today. And even if they had just been playing 5-on-0 for 40 minutes, that's 4 turnovers would have been pretty good for this
Yeah.
bunch. Let me finish this stat real quick. Grand Canyon only turned the ball over on 8.8% of their possessions. So in part, I think the turnover numbers for both teams were lower because there wasn't a whole lot of great defense being played. But still, for Indiana, to keep the turnover numbers low like that, we certainly didn't see any games like that last year. So that was something to be encouraged by. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Ryan.
in a ragged sort of flat game against lesser competition to only turn the ball over, that few times, what was it, 5 point something percent into the possessions?
Yeah,
Uh,
5.8.
that's actually remarkable. Because in a game like this, there's just no energy. You're going to make mistakes. You're not as focused, and so the fact that they didn't and were able to, they didn't shoot as well as they normally do in the first half, especially, and they kind of closed that gap in the second half. But they weren't turning the ball over. They weren't making mistakes. They were just, the points where they didn't get baskets was, just doing, not running the offense properly, or taking a shot that it was ill-advised or something like that. It wasn't a situation where they were just throwing the ball around the gym and just beating up on a inferior opponent. They were actually running stuff and seemed to be playing pretty well together.
Couldn't we also say, though, then, that only turning Grand Canyon over 6 times is kind of concerning? I mean, this is a team 280th in the country coming in. They had been turning the ball over on 22% of their possessions. And for a program that prides itself on deflections, which is supposed to be kind of a measuring stick of activity and pressure, wouldn't you say that only turning them over 6 times kind of shows that lack of defensive pressure, especially out on the perimeter?
Oh, absolutely. I think that it does cut both ways. I mean, you'd like to get more turnovers. I thought that Grand Canyon did a great job keeping the ball. Where that gap sort of flips from something like the Louisville game, where there were some turnovers going back and forth, is that we completely dominated the rebounding game, which meant they didn't get any second chances. So they were getting their shots off, but we were shutting them down, and so those things tend to balance out. In the long run at the end of the full season. But, right now it sort of looks like, well, they traded the creating turnovers for rebounding the basketball and not giving those extra easy opportunities to Grand Canyon.
So I just want a quick interlude right here, looking at the live viewer numbers. It's a decent number, more than I expected, obviously less than the Louisville game. And I just want you to know, if you're watching the postgame show for the Grand Canyon game at 6:18 Central Time on the Saturday, 2 Saturdays before Christmas, when you could be out shopping, you could be out doing a lot of things, you, my friend, are an Indiana basketball diehard. And I just want to give you a round of applause, because we appreciate you being here live, not waiting for the podcast. Thank you very much. And really anybody who's watching and live tweeting this game, you're a diehard. Because, I mean, that's the thing about, I was talking, it's kind of funny, Heather's parents are actually visiting us this weekend, and so we came home. We were out earlier today, and instead of going back out, they decided to watch some of this IU game. And within about 6 minutes, everybody was asleep, except for me, which is, it's kind of how, watching the team and watching the crowd at Assembly Hall, that's a little bit how it felt, there. Luckily, everybody woke up in the second half. But anyway, fortunately, we only have one more of these. We have the New Orleans game. They're 310th in Ken Palm. Grand Canyon coming into this was 286th, I think. But 2 out of 3 of the next games, big ones for Indiana, against top 25 teams in Ken Palm, Butler and Georgetown. So, Ryan, let's look big picture here a little bit. Indiana comes out against Louisville, and they lose by 20. It's a 5-point game at halftime, 15-point deficit in the second half. Things got away from Indiana. Legs looked tired. Shots stopped falling. But most everybody came away from that game feeling positive that, hey, Indiana did some things. They played with Louisville. If they can find a way to clean up the glass, if Hunter Mosquera-Perea can play like this inside, obviously the competition isn't always going to be a top 5 team on a neutral floor like Louisville, so there were some positives. So, let's kind of state of the program right now, state of the season, as we go into these 2 really, really big, important non-conference games for Indiana. We talked with Andy Bottoms after the Louisville game, and before the Louisville game, he thought Indiana needed to win 2 out of those 3 games. We lost the Louisville game. It stands to reason Indiana needs to win these 2 games to put itself in a really good position going into Big Ten play. So how are you feeling? I mean, based on what you saw against Louisville, what you saw today, how are you feeling about these 2 games? These are teams that are going to be higher ranked than Indiana. They're going to be favored. They're both on neutral floors. Are you confident?
I think Butler's a decent team. I think they're a little overinflated right now and overranked. I think we should beat Butler. I would confidently pick this team to beat Butler. I would say I think the Georgetown game is going to be closer if I had to pick between the 2. I think Indiana's going to can beat both of them. I don't know if they will. Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen, but I think that every time they've had a challenge, they've stepped up and played up to that challenge. Now, look, for about 33 minutes against Louisville, they were right in that game, and at least within striking distance, and then it kind of fell apart. And a lot of that had to do with Louisville's pressure and the fact that Louisville just absolutely crushed them on the glass. And so I think I don't think you're going to get that from Butler or Georgetown. I think you're going to have a good defensive team of Butler, and I think Georgetown's going to be a good defensive team, but they're not going to make Indiana run. They're not going to do high pressure defense like Louisville did and tire them out. I think these are going to be two teams they can stay in it with for the entire game. And frankly, Indiana's got more talent. It's not they're not as seasoned maybe, and they're not as experienced, but they've got plenty of talent, and that's not going to be a problem. If Indiana does what it has to do, makes shots, makes the threes that it's supposed to make, attacks the basket, attacks the lane the way they have, I think they win both those games. Now, it could be, they could have a complete off night and screw it, but you know what? I'm confident going into those games. I don't know why, but I really am.
Currently, Ken Pom predicts a 71-68 victory for Butler over Indiana. For how much stock you put in that, with a 62% chance for Butler to win that game. A few numbers of note: Butler is ninth in the country right now in defense, holding opponents to .89 points per possession. They are 12th in three-point field goal percentage defense at 25.3%. So it's going to be a game where, obviously it's strength versus strength. Indiana's strength is offense and scoring. Butler's strength is defense. And so, we'll see. It's obviously not going to be such an up and down game like Louisville. Butler wants to slow it down. So perhaps you might think Indiana's legs won't get as tired as they did in that Louisville game, but they're going to have to work a lot harder in the half court against a team like Butler than they did against Louisville. So we'll see. Obviously that's such a big game. It's next Saturday, so Indiana has a whole week off. I believe finals are this week, so the whole week off to focus on that game. And I'll tell you one thing about Tom Crean is that when he game plans for a specific game, this team typically comes out and plays pretty well. I'm thinking about the Michigan game last year at home when I think we had a week, maybe I don't know how much time we had leading up to that game, but clearly we had a great game plan going into that game for how to stop Nick Stauskas, and we did. And so, Crean seems to have done a pretty good job when given time like this to game plan. So we'll see how that goes. Obviously, it's a game Indiana needs to play well. We'll see if they're able to do it. I want to go back to the Grand Canyon game real quick, too. Point out a couple of guys who I think warrant mention. Nick Zeisloff, 9.7 boards. I thought in the first half, when everybody else was kind of playing like they had their feet stuck in quicksand, Nick was really playing hard, hustling, trying to set the tone for the team, which was good to see. Took a few ill-advised three-pointers, but did make 3 of them, finish with those 9 points. Robert Johnson, 7 points, 2 assists, 3 rebounds, faded into the background a lot today, and didn't quite have the impact on the game that he typically does. And you don't want to draw too many conclusions from a game like Grand Canyon. But I feel, and tell me what you think about this, I feel like his play has slipped a little bit recently. He's not quite stuffing the stat sheet like he was. He seems maybe even a little bit tentative. What are you seeing from him?
Well, I think one thing I mentioned during the Louisville game when I was tweeting from bed is that it's amazing that he and James Blackman get their pockets picked from behind while they're driving more than anyone I've ever seen. I mean, they just, they're so good, yet they just have so little awareness of being tracked down from behind. It's happened all season. But I think that with any freshman, you're going to hit lulls like this, and it might be just, look, he got knocked around in that Louisville game. I mean, everybody did, and they're going to be banged up and bruised, and it might take them a week or two to recover. I mean, that, in high school, you're not playing guys who are physically that strong on a night-to-night basis. And if you play that, it might be once a year. You're doing that every other, every third or fifth day in college. And so I think that you're going to hit lulls like that where you're just not where you're supposed to be. Hopefully you catch a second win, bounce back a few days later, and things like that. Blackman really hasn't shown that yet. I mean, he had a down game or two. I thought the first half of the Louisville game, Blackman had struggled mightily. So, I mean, you're seeing that they are freshmen. They're not used to this competition level on a consistent basis. Even against lower tier teams, you're still playing scholarship players at Division I schools. So it's just a grind, and some guys get worn down by it. Plus, again, you've got like you said, you got finals, you've got all this other stuff, you've got the holidays coming up. I mean, so seeing guys hit a lull, especially freshmen in December, is not really that surprising. We know what kind of player Johnson is, and we know what kind of player he's going to be. So it's just about him sort of weathering the storm and the team, picked up around him. It wasn't really a glaring weakness today that stood out. It wasn't like he was screwing us over with his play. He just had an off day, and so I think that's going to happen. And you just kind of, it's on everybody else to sort of pick up their play and compensate for that, because that's going to happen to freshmen.
By the way, if you have any questions, shoot us a tweet with the hashtag assembly call. Over in the YouTube chat, our buddy Tanner Etheridge says, I think Indiana needs to realize that you put teams away with getting to the line and attacking the basket. Threes are a good way to go on runs and get back or stay in the game, but put teams like this away with attacking the basket and living at the line. So Indiana took 33 point attempts today out of a total of 75 shot attempts. They were 33.33% from 3, 10 of 30, 44% overall, for an effective field goal percentage of 50.7, which is well below what they've done for the season. So I have a couple thoughts on that. I was actually thinking at the beginning of the game, I'd love to see Indiana come out and say, we're not going to shoot any three-pointers today, and just try and do everything, driving, getting inside, really trying to work on that two-point game. But then, of course, that's kind of silly, because you want to work on the things that you actually need in big games. And we know that for this team to win big games, they're going to have to make threes. That's what kept them in that game against Louisville early was, Nick Zeisloff made a couple of huge threes when Louisville pushed out the lead in the first half. And it was making those three-pointers. When they stopped making them in the second half, they fell down. And no, it's not good to be that reliant on the three, but the way that this team is constructed, they're going to need to. And so I do think that, Tanner brings up a good point, because you've got to have some balance. And this team does need to continue to penetrate, continue to get to the line, continue to attack defenses off the dribble. And so they can't just settle on guarding the three-pointer, so that there is, multiple options on offense. But, Ryan, what do you think offensively? Do you think this team is striking a good balance right now between shooting threes and driving, or are they starting to settle a little bit too much for three-pointers? Because I do think today, especially in the first half, they settled for too many threes. I think part of that was just the game flow and just kind of the lackadaisical nature of that first half. But I thought they really started attacking more in the second half, got off to that good start in large part because they started driving and attacking the basket more.
Yeah, you're right about the first half. I thought they settled for far too many threes, and I was writing about that on Twitter. I just think that they were taking easy shots, the shots that came easy to them. They weren't working for baskets. Now remember, here's the thing that a lot of people don't. They treat all three-pointers the same. They just look at the raw number from three-pointers. If you drive, draw the defense to you, and kick to a wide open three, that's not the same as dribbling twice and launching a three. I mean, so, it's hard to find statistics and break them down about what kind of shots they were. I'm fine late in the game when you're putting a team away if you attack the basket and kick it out for a three. Yeah, that'll still be marked as a three, but it's the difference between an 18-foot jumper as a two and a dunk. I mean, if a guy like Nick Zeisloft is going to hit that three-pointer if he's wide open and there's nobody around him. So, it really depends on the shot you're getting. The key is, yes, to keep attacking and make – and they've mentioned this many times, and we've talked about it. The offense has to go through the paint. It doesn't have to be thrown into a post player so he can turn around and kick it out. But if you drive into the paint, you're going to draw the defense to you and kick out to open guys. That's just the way basketball works. It's the way basketball has worked since day one. And so as long as they're getting good looks, I don't care how many threes they take, because these guys can shoot it. Last year, I would have, put the shackles on them and said, no, do not shoot that. I don't care if you're, if Stan Robinson gets a ball out there with 30 feet between him and another defender, I still don't want him shooting a three at this point.
Which he did today, by the way.
I know. God, Stan. But it's, it's one of those things where if it's a good shot, it's a good shot. So I don't think it matters three or two. It matters how you're getting that there. And if you're just passing it around the perimeter, not creating space, not moving the defense, or, James Blackman does this from time to time, and he's really good at it. But he'll just catch the ball at the top of the key, take one dribble, act like he's kind of going to drive, and then just pull up and shoot a three. Now, he hits those, but that's not necessarily a great shot. So if you're getting those off of driving kick and you're making the defense work and making the defense move, I don't care if there's 30 seconds left and you're up by 2. If you kick it out to a wide open guy, I'm fine with him taking that three. It might not be the smartest play in the world, but if it's a wide open shot off of good offense, I don't care, where it's from. So really, it's more about the shots they're getting, as opposed to whether it's a 2, whether it's a 3, whether you're working the lane or whatever. You want to get into the middle of the defense, draw them in, and find the open guy, whether that's a 2 or whether you're finding the open guy underneath the basket for a dunk.
Okay, so this is awesome. So we have the last actually Twitter question that we got after the Louisville game. This is from Bruce Kinsey. I'm putting it up here. He says, Troy Williams is a turnover machine. Besides dunk, does little else. Now, obviously, if you listen to the show, you'll know that while Troy Williams can be a turnover machine, I disagree with that. Troy does bring a lot with his aggressiveness, his athleticism. Here's the reason why I pull this up. Reading some of the tweets here, Jeremy Price at the press conference where Troy Williams is, quotes Troy Williams as saying, it was nice to not be a, quote, turnover machine tonight. So there you go, Bruce. So maybe even Troy agreed with you that he was a turnover machine in that Louisville game. But
Hey.
as we lauded him for at the beginning of the game, he came out with a better mindset and had no turnovers today.
Well, and it's clear Troy's a listener, which is great. And thank you, Troy, for your support. We really appreciate that.
Yes, we do appreciate that, Troy. And hey, as I said before the season, I thought Troy could be an All Big Ten player this year. I thought the way he ended last year, some of the flashes that he's shown, and when you put up 14 points, 8 boards, those are all Big Ten numbers. I know it's Grand Canyon. I'm not saying he's going to do that all the time, but that potential is there. He just, I think, again, be a finisher more than you're a creator. Know what you're doing when you're playing well. That's, Andy Bottoms. One of the things, our typical co-host here. One of the things he so often says is that guys need to understand what they're doing when they play well. And one of his biggest criticisms of IU over the years since we've been doing the show is that a lot of times our players, especially the young players, don't seem to have an understanding of what they're doing when they play well. And that would mean a guy like Troy who works so well on the baseline, so well off the ball, cutting and finishing off other people, creating, him deciding to be a creator and dribble too much. What are you doing when you play well? Same with Nick Zeisloft. He is a spot-up three-point shooter that when he's dribbling and trying to do a whole bunch of stuff, creating, not as effective. So I think every time we see a game like this from Troy where he really seems to understand what his role needs to be, it's a positive. So, and we'll see again if he carries that forward. No real need to belabor this one, Ryan. Obviously, just a solid 94-66 victory for the Hoosiers. And I don't know that we learned too much. One thing I do want to touch on before we get to final thoughts, though, is defense. Because there were some good signs of defense, and I thought we attacked the glass better on defense. But I don't know. It seems to me, especially in zone, that we let ball handlers start outside the three-point line and get all the way to the basket more than should be humanly possible. I mean, I can almost see it, when you're playing man and if, guys get lost. When you're playing zone, how do you let someone drive from outside the three-point line all the way to the cup? I mean, that's, it's got to be either lack of awareness, lack of effort, just lack of being willing to kind of step up and make the lateral movements that you need to, or complete lack of athletic ability. And I think, yes, some of our players are lateral quickness challenged, but we certainly have enough athletic ability to stay in front of guys, and we continue to see that game in, game out. You have any explanation or any prescription for how we can fix that?
I think a lot of it is guys' lack of awareness where they are on the floor. I think they're aware of where they are in relation to other players, in relation to the offensive players that are out there. This is particularly I'm talking about in zone. But they're not aware of where they are on the court as much. And maybe it just takes more time working with the zone. I mean, everyone plays a 2-3 zone all through. You have a 2-3 zone in high school you go to, but actually playing in it against solid competition is completely different than running it for 5 minutes in a high school game. So I think a lot of it is guys are over helping, they're over rotating, and you're getting that mix where the wings come up, guard the perimeter, then drop back down, and all that stuff. And with all that shifting going back and forth, guys are losing where their spot in the zone, where the real area they're supposed to be. And instead of playing in their zone, they're playing the offense. They're playing where the offensive players are, and it's getting them out of position because what the offense wants you to do when you're in a zone is to guard them like they're in man. And that's what opens up the gaps in the zone, because if one guy's overplaying on an individual player, his zone is going to have gaps in it, and it's going to be open. And so it's one of those things where what they need to do, and it's hard to do because most people their entire lives grow up playing man-to-man defense, is it's a completely different skill to play zone defense. You have to back off that, guard a guy when he's got the ball in your zone, but also back off when the ball isn't in your zone and you're supposed to be covering an area. Because if you're not covering your area, somebody else has to step up to help, then somebody has to cover theirs, and then it's a chain reaction that throws everybody off. And I think a couple reversals this team is showing, there are gaps that guys can drive through. And it's also situational awareness and just awareness where you are on the court. I mean, there was one drive tonight, and it was just the example of how Hunter is such an amazing athlete, but he just gets lost at times. And there was a drive into the middle of the zone, which is exactly where you want to attack a zone, right in the middle of the lane by one of the shortest guys on the floor. I don't remember who it was. He had a pull-up jumper. Now, Hunter had backed down so far to guard in the post, which he's not guarding a man. He's covering a zone there, not a man. But he dropped so far down because there was a cutter there that he was literally standing underneath the hoop. And he's supposed to be our rim protector. You can't rebound or block a shot from directly underneath the hoop. And so the shot went up, and there was a rebound, and he wasn't there. He was standing underneath the hoop. He couldn't jump up and get the rebound because he would have – I mean, knowing Hunter, he'd have hit his head on the rim. So it went right back to the guy who shot it, and he laid it in. And it's – it's one of those things where that's just complete lack of awareness of where you are on the court. I mean, had he looked up, he would have been looking right up the cylinder. So it's just guys have to know where they are at all times, especially in a zone. It's way more important in a zone than a man to know where you are on the court and know. I mean, just look down at the painted lines. They're there to help you. I mean, that's where you're supposed to be.
Well, and ironically, I thought Indiana got themselves in a lot of trouble against Louisville because they overhelped up in the zone. And they would overhelp, especially Hunter, and then Montrezl Harrell was just kind of sitting back there, and he would just pop up for the dunk. So I wonder if part of that was, Hunter having a little bit of, PTSD almost from that Louisville game from being dunked on so much that he was more hesitant to help up, I guess maybe fearing that Montrezl Harrell was going to be wearing a Canyon jersey.
No, and that's understandable. Like, you especially when you harp on something all week in practice, and it's like, make sure you don't leave your spot, make sure you don't leave your spot. But he's, it was an overreaction to that, and I think you're right. I think that's exactly what it was. Is he was playing lower and lower and lower. Well, it's like not that low, but and it's sort of like, okay, it's a nuanced balance here. But yeah, I mean, and they got killed on that against Louisville, absolutely killed on that because he'd step up to help. But he's leaving a guy wide open. And you can really, in a zone, you can only step up to help if you know somebody's got your backside covered. And we just didn't against Louisville because Harrell's that good at finding gaps in the zone. And so, it's one of those things where it's a balance, and they've got to work it out. They've got to get it figured out because we're going to see a lot of zone in Big Ten this year. We want to make teams shoot over us.
All right, so here's a quote and then a stat that's going to blow your mind. So first of all, as proof that Tom Crean is just like the rest of us, Sam Bashuzin of the IDS quotes Tom Crean on Indiana's turnovers, only having 4, says, "Crazy, isn't it? That's beyond belief." Well, Coach Crean, after watching your teams for 7 years, yes, we agree. And Tom even says, he said, "I still have to go back through the tape to see if that's accurate." Says he's never coached a team that had only had that many turnovers in a game. So here's a stat that's going to kind of blow your mind, and it's good for the Hoosiers, but not so good for an ex-Hoosier. And that is that Indiana had 4 turnovers for the entire game tonight. Hoosier hero, legend, one of the most beloved players in history, Victor Oladipo, 5 turnovers in the first half against Atlanta tonight. So unfortunately, Victor's still adjusting to the role of a primary ball handler in the NBA. Hey, but in his defense, he's been playing really well lately. So just a rough game tonight.
Hey, we've seen Victor turn the ball over 5 times and a half before. It's not.
Yeah, we have.
But I also read that it's the lowest turnover percentage in Tom Crean's time at Indiana tonight. Tonight's game was. I think.
Yeah.
I think Alex Bozich posted that.
I mean, 5.8%. And hey, that Indiana has been doing a much, much, much better job with the turnovers this year. I think. Let me see. Coming into the game, the Hoosiers were in the top 100 in the country in turnover percentage coming in at 18.2. So, and after last year, which was just atrocious. I mean, that is, and that's with the Louisville game included. So, I mean,
that's what I was going to say. I mean, that Louisville game skews it, people. I mean, if you are just a casual fan, just an IU fan, don't watch a whole lot of college basketball, Louisville's defense is really good. I mean, that is what they force you to do. That wasn't Indiana playing poor. I mean, it was. They were playing poorly, but it was, it may have seemed like unforced errors, but Louisville forces you into those unforced errors, and that is what they do. And Rick Pitino's teams have been doing that since he was with Kentucky in the 90s. That is exactly what those defenses are built to do. And so Indiana in that game, I mean, it was frustrating, but I was just kind of sitting there like, this is a young team with a lot of ball handlers who just want to dribble, and Louisville is just doing the Jedi mind trick and getting him to do exactly what they want him to do, and it caught up with Indiana, obviously. But if you take that game out, our turnover percentages have been great this season for the most part, and it's stunning to me that last year this team was all about was one of the best defensive teams in the league, one of the best rebounding teams in the country, and had a terrible, unworkable offense that just couldn't get anything done, couldn't shoot threes, and turn the ball over all the time. It is the exact photo negative of that this year. I mean, it really is. It's amazing how in 1 year you can change so much. And hey, losing an inside presence like Vonleh will kill your rebounding and your defense in spots if you don't have him replaced, and so that really was a big hit. And I think Cronic after the Louisville game said, hey, you give this team Vonleh and Luke Fisher, who are both supposed to be here this year, and they win that game by 10 points against Louisville. And it's hard to argue with that because there was one glaring weakness against Louisville other than the turnovers, and it was the lack of any semblance of size or just somebody to make the night difficult for Harrell.
This was a good day, Ryan, until you reminded everybody of the possibility of Vonleh and Fisher on this team, and then just totally depressed us all again, thinking about what could have been. But
I'm trying to
alas.
slip that in. I'm trying to slip that into every show this year.
Yeah, you are. Between you and Andy, last show, I tried my hardest to not talk defense and rebounding the entire show, and Andy decides to hijack it with his final thought and talks about rebounding and defense and how pissed poor we were. Brought everybody down, and then I had to bring everybody back up at the end, which, I don't know, that's what I'm here for. I get it, but, we got to stop ending, kind of throwing in this negative stuff at the end of the show. Anyway, 94-66 victory for the Hoosiers today over Grand Canyon. Let's wrap this up. Ryan, your final thoughts on this Hoosier victory.
It was, again, Indiana did what they had to do, and it's encouraging when you saw some of the earlier season games that were closer than they should have been, like Lamar and Eastern Washington and UNC Greensboro, and then you see them, against Savannah State and against Grand Canyon, about the same level of competition, really. There's not a real whole lot of difference between these teams. I think Eastern Washington's a lot better than people gave them credit for. I think that's a tournament team. I think they're going to win their conference. So I think at the end of the year, that's not going to – I mean, still, you should win that game on your home floor. No one's going to argue that. But I think that it won't look like as bad a win as we originally thought. But I think it's nice that these guys are getting games to be in that 30-point range with about 5 minutes left and just burying the opponent, and let's move on to the next one. Let's get to finals and get it over with. So this team's doing what it needs to do, and it's not playing down to its competition like it was for a while. It seems to be playing up when the competition ratchets up. Hopefully that pattern continues. We haven't seen them really come out flat against a good team yet, and they haven't really played many good teams, but in the Pittsburgh game and the Louisville game, they came out and played well in that first 10 minutes. And so that's a key for us, is that we've got to, with how difficult the Big Ten's going to be this year, you've got to start well. Because if you get down with a young team, you can get buried and never get back up. And so the fact that they're doing what they need to do, getting these games knocked out, over, done, everybody's on the bench cheering for Tim Perler with 5 minutes left, or 4 minutes left, or whatever it was tonight when he came in, that's what they need to do, and hopefully it's what they continue to do. And let's beat Butler. I'm so sick of hearing about Butler.
I agree with you. Let's beat them. They were, it was a nice little story for a while, and I was kind of rooting for them. But, enough Butler. Let's beat them. I agree. So my final thought tonight, I want to take it off court real quick because, again, solid victory for Indiana, all that stuff. But obviously the big test is Saturday against Butler. But John Crispin was on the call tonight for the Big Ten Network, and I thought he did a phenomenal job. I'm hoping that we get more of him doing the color commentary for IU games. The former Northwestern player, because I thought he did a really good job. But something he said in the second half really stood out to me, and I think it's something that all Indiana fans should be proud of. And which is, and I almost led with it for tonight's show as the banner moment, but that is number one, that Indiana has a 3.1 GPA in the Tom Crean era, which is excellent. And obviously, with what kind of what we'd seen before that, obviously the academics weren't such a priority. But that has continued to be for this team, and actually, Crean was just asked about it in the post-game press conference, and gave credit to Marnie Mooney, the athletic advisor for these Hoosiers. And Crean says she's made everyone better. She's the tough aunt. She's the big sister. She's the caring mother. That's quoting Andy Witry. And I've had the good fortune to interview Marnie. She's fantastic. Does a great job with these guys of helping them out with the academics, and I think the program as a whole does a really good job of making sure that's a focus. And say what you want. To me, as a longtime fan, that's something that I take pride in. That's something that's important to me, and so it's great to see. Obviously, this team had quite the checkered off season with the off-court stuff, but that is good to hear. And it was also good to hear he, had a little anecdote from the shoot-around talking about how impressed he was that all the players came up and introduced themselves and were just very friendly, very classy. So, look, this, Indiana's 8-2, had some ups, some downs. There's going to be some highs and some cold winter nights coming, in the next few months. We know that with this young team. But I think, the nice thing is knowing that, this program, obviously we haven't had any more reports of any off-court stuff. Hopefully some of that stuff is starting to kind of reverse itself and solve itself. But academically, certainly this program continues to be outstanding. And, another 1,000 APR, so all of those things are exactly as IU fans want them, as they should be. And that has been throughout the Tom Crean era something to be really proud of, and it looks like it continues. So can't think of a more positive note to end on than that. And Ryan, you wanted to jump in real quick too on that note?
Yeah, I just think it's interesting they brought that up, and then you saw Tom Crean sort of, there was a scuffle at the end, and he kind of reached out to one of the Grand Canyon players and said, hey, that was our bad, let's get back to playing. He shook his hand and shook his teammate's hand, kind of slapped him 5, and you don't get even when the negative stuff was happening in the off season, right before the season started. There are degrees of negativity about a program, and I know it was a shock to the system of a lot of Hoosiers fans, but to people comparing this to other out of control programs. I mean, out of control programs don't turn in perfect APR scores. They don't have kids who are willing to look people in the eye when they talk to them. They're just more about themselves, and they're not about all this other stuff. And Indiana, I mean, it's a degree of out of controlness, or whatever, however you want to say it, and it's never gotten there with these guys. They're not. They made mistakes, but they're not. It's not some runaway train like some were freaking out and leading it to believe. And these guys get it done in the classroom. From basically all reports, they're good citizens, good kids, and the coach holds them to that standard. So that's something that I appreciate as a fan. Obviously, we can criticize stuff on the floor. I mean, there's plenty to talk about as far as that goes. But off the floor, I have every confidence in the world in these kids.
Yep. A good note to end on. Ryan, it is great to have you back. I think we'll start to have our normal trio here for many, many more games moving forward here. Butler, Georgetown to close out the non-conference schedule, plus the New Orleans game thrown in. And then Big Ten season starts with that Nebraska game on New Year's Eve. So it's going to start coming fast. Obviously, we have a week off now between today and the Butler game, but then it's going to start coming fast, going to start coming furious. And we will be your guide through this Indiana season, which hopefully has many more highs than lows. Today was certainly a high as the Hoosiers win 94-66. Everyone who watched live, we thank you. To everyone listening on the podcast, we thank you as well. We wish you a wonderful week, and we'll be back to talk to you Saturday after Indiana plays Butler. Have a good one, everybody.